With over 20 years of experience and upbringing in the esoteric arts, I'm going to let you know some of the things I really wish I knew before I even started down the path of the occult or witchcraft, magic, or any kind of spiritual seeking. But first off, my name is thelema. I come from a family that was born and bred in Indigenous style witchcraft of the Indigenous Maya variety. But I've also explored many esoteric paths outside of the Indigenous sphere as well. This branched off even into professional studies and utilizing these skill sets in professional fields. Most notably the cross-cultural, not so much the magical, in more professional fields. But the more you learn about different cultures, beliefs, and magic, and crafts, so to speak, you end up coming away with an invaluable treasure trove of knowledge. You find some universal fundamentals that connect across all boundaries of magic, despite culture and time period. And you'll find very precious, exclusive nuances as well. All of that being said, when you start on the spiritual seeking path, it can be really overwhelming. There may be even hesitation about like, which way do I turn? Which way do I, right turn, wrong turn? There's a lot of perceived authority too, of like, no, you should do this first. This is the backbone of what you should be doing. Pro tip on that, that is usually culturally dependent. I'm not going to give you a flowery answer of like, oh, well, it's so diverse, we could never know. I would disagree with that. I would say that there are some fundamentals that people should kind of gravitate towards, especially if they want to eventually go down a certain magical path. Like if you want to do Wicca, study Wicca and study like what the greats of Wicca have done to pave the way and what they say the fundamentals are. But there are some more paths that are a bit more obscure or slightly lean or are less formalized. So with these confusions being said, my first major tip is this. Understand that you may not know everything right away. You may not know everything ever. I think a better way to put this is that you may not know enough right away to start getting good. You may not know enough right away to start being proficient at magic and manifesting. You may not know enough to even see results right away. Understand that that is okay. Why is this? Because the truth is that magic is a skill set. It is not a microwave. It is not a vending machine, which a lot of people think that like, well, I should be getting results immediately. And that is simply not true. There is kind of an element of beginner's luck. There actually may be some advantages to kind of nonchalantly doing magic and not caring too much about the results. But I want you to think about it kind of like how these short form media videos are, where you may have like somebody accidentally go viral and they didn't intend it. But then they try to go viral again and they don't. And then they get frustrated. And what they're best served doing is probably going back and saying like, how did they go viral? It wasn't just a snap of the fingers. There was kind of a method to the madness, even though they did not know that they were plugging into a method. You have to be comfortable learning bit by bit. Here's a good example. Learning magic, learning manifesting, learning any kind of spiritual tradition is similar to learning a brand new language. And like any new language that you start off with, you will be saying the same words that toddlers use. This might feel a little bit somewhat embarrassing even. But what you start off with, they're not the fanciest of words. When you are learning a new language, you may even be made fun of, but you have to get good at the basics of these languages in order to progress in them. The second point I want to cover, what works for someone else may not work for you. I think better put, though, magic is diverse, and one practice's priorities and their core rituals may not be the same priorities and core rituals of another's practice. This is why a one-size-fits-all model can't really work for all traditions based upon their priorities. Even if at some points in the path they come to the same conclusions, or they recognize the same components. So for example, there's this perception that Buddhism is completely non-theistic, but there's various different kinds of Buddhism, but many forms of Buddhism, even the ones that kind of have a non-theistic core, will still recognize an entire vibrant world of spirits. So to say that this Buddhist system, you can't have a spirit, well, that would simply be inaccurate. Because when it does cross into this having worlds of spirits, now you're talking very similar languages that the grimoires do in Europe. And you're talking about various indigenous African and Native American worlds of spirits as well. So the priorities of the practice kind of determine the initial steps. Another example is that the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram from occult traditions. It's not the most useful thing if you want to have like a more shamanic or indigenous way of practicing, because it's kind of like this banishing. It's a banishing, right? So that would be the Western terms, but I think you could also say it's some sort of cleansing mechanism. But if you have a indigenous focus, then going with a more elemental landscape kind of cleansing, what is known as a limpia, these are going to serve you better. Here's another example. Folk magic, which makes up a big bedrock of a lot of indigenous style thing, could only do so much for me because I was asking bigger existential questions about the universe, about the metaphysical. I was asking bigger questions about that. So looking to Western magic systems, because I was speaking the English language, right? I have been raised with the English language. I was raised with Spanish too, but, if you want a career and stuff, lingua franca is English. So learning Western magical paradigms and their explanations for it, just because of a language barrier, could actually help me go back and look at older traditions from different languages and just make sense of them all. Not culturally appropriate them and try to mix and match them, but see where there was enough similarities that I could break that barrier between language and start trying to relate to it on more indigenous terms. As a result, I ended up getting better at my folk magic because I went beyond folk magic and then was able to retrieve other levels of understanding and skill set to where I could enhance my practice. The third point I want to talk about today is it's okay to start off with the bare minimums. You may end up getting overwhelmed by a system that calls for a bunch of tools right from the start. While magic does not all come from within you, like how Disney wants to say, at the beginning you may want to start off with something a bit more internal just so you can start warming up your metaphysical muscles, and then branch off into higher performing systems. I really do encourage you to explore systems outside of just dealing with internal energy, because it's just going to expand your worldview. A lot of the internal systems are have an inherent ignorance about them too, of like, oh no, this is what the ancients were trying to get at all along, when that's quite counter to history. Many of them were also incorporating external things as well. A lot of the inner sanctification actually comes from more modern sources. That's a whole nother topic for another time. I promise I will cover it. You should not settle for simplicity all the time. A spiritual practice is not an actual practice if you're always taking the easier route. Nor is like manifesting and magic not a practice. It's not a live art if you're always taking the easy route. Again, gurus have lied to many people. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but it can be done. That is not to say that every magical task needs to be an arduous task. This extends to tools. So in brujeria, there's a notion of you use what you can get. Scissors, kitchen knives, clay cups. This is where a bit more superficial and aesthetic practitioners they'll hear this and then they'll call it a day and be like, okay, that's it. Just use what I can get. And I'm legit. What they fail to realize and fail to mention is that, first of all, The bare bonesness of using some of these tools was because of Catholic scrutiny, when it's really, with all the freedoms that pagan nations would have had, they would have had bigger tools and sanctified tools. It is an adaptation made for not ideal times and not ideal practice. Another thing that they'll fail to mention is that even in old school brujas households, like brujeria households, many of these like common items end up becoming sanctified items anyway. They have a pair of scissors that are only used for magic. They have a knife that is only used for magic, even if it is like more commonly looking. Brujas or witches of this variety would charge these items over time, of which they would not use these tools for anything else besides magic. This doesn't make it too different from a proper magical tool that is consecrated with actual correspondences and magical timing. My fourth point today, it's okay to mess up. It is okay if spells do not work. This is not some kind of self-help assurance. This comes from a realization of the reality of magic and metaphysics. That is that all of this stuff is a live art. It is not necessarily a question of worthiness, although sometimes that idea of worthiness can come in to help, but especially when you're just starting off, it's really just people learning a new skill set. And the reason why we don't think of it like that is because religions and spiritual gurus have treated this as some kind of holier-than-thou art, and sometimes they have nefarious purposes of kind of monopolizing the knowledge. But in the modern day, especially these past 2 decades, we've had enough kind of comparative analysis within like group rituals and like people going in and out of practices and trying different things to where the commonalities seem to stand out. Magic is a performance-based skill set, just kind of like anything else. It's almost like a sport. There are no competitions, but the skill sets matter. So with that being said, it's okay to mess up because you're just learning and you're developing new motor skills, but on a spiritual plane. Like all new skill sets, you're going to hit, you're going to miss. You're going to hit a home run, you're going to 3 strikes, you're out. Keep in mind, even professional basketball players don't make every hoop. Keep in mind, professional hockey players don't hit a goal every time. Keep in mind, the world's best fighters don't have 100% strike accuracy. In fact, in the case of like fighting, if you can get a 40% strike accuracy in a given fight, you're actually doing pretty good. This is because actually, like fighting, magic and manifestation, whatever your desire is kind of like a moving target. And like a target in fighting, it's sometimes hard to track down. So it's okay to do things again. Look to get better incrementally. And a fifth thing is you should have some kind of daily practice. Now, this doesn't have to be a daily spell or a daily ritual. Over time, you can add complexity to these daily tasks. But a daily practice should make sense. Like it should lead to some kind of greater why. When I can see when you're really just starting out, just try to do anything for a daily practice, some kind of like meditation, and starting off. But I don't think you hear common complaints about meditation. And I think this is why, is because you're kind of just going into the void and there's no like greater purpose. It's just consistently going there. Whereas like, here's a kind of like a Mayan daily practices where you count the days. The days shift every time. The metaphysical themes shift every time. You can even do this with planetary models. But the purpose of metaphysically tuning into something is constantly shifting. However, it's constantly relevant, because what was relevant yesterday may not be relevant today, or it may be relevant, but in a new progressed way, because today is not yesterday. So that's a really healthy, greater daily practice. They're a bit more like mystic practices rather than like pure like spell casting practices for daily stuff. So do not make these daily practices complex because you think complex is better. As I said, taking a bit of a more mystic turnaround with daily practice is better because spells, in of themselves, especially as you progress, you want to be putting a bit more muscle into them. So they should be much more intentional. They should require a bit more exertion. I myself literally had one on 2 days ago, and it took it was like a 3-hour ritual, and it zapped me. It took everything that I had to do into it. And I wanted to do a follow-up ritual yesterday. However, I was just way too zapped to take advantage of that new timing. I was going to do a different kind of astrological timing, but I was just way too zapped. So I did kind of like something that would resemble a prayer with at an altar, and that was kind of like my compensation for it, because I really just went all out the night before. That was a bit more of like a spell casting kind of ritual. I am not going to tell you that your craft or your practice is going to be easy all the time. If you are actually serious about whether it's magic, mysticism, manifestation, you will take up the discipline to do the things that you may not necessarily want to do all the time. You will develop a sense of responsibility if you are serious. Keep in mind, and this is kind of like a bonus tip, some people may hear this and be like, well, this person doesn't, is like, this person's constantly happy and doesn't have to do anything that they don't want to. Keep in mind that selling manifestation is an industry, and they have to keep up this facade that everything is going well because they are master manifestors, when really a lot of those people don't even do manifestations themselves. They talk about it enough, they have some kind of experience, but the majority of their time and effort goes into marketing and running their business that is selling the manifestation. That is why they constantly look as if they are on top of the world with their manifestations, is because it has to be crafted for that in order to sell. But when you are starting off, you don't really know what you want to have responsibility towards. You don't know what you want to commit to, and that's fine. But the point of being a beginner is to not be a beginner as soon as possible. Overall, magic, spirituality, mysticism, it should all enhance your life. As you add astrological timing, as you add more advanced correspondences, you may feel a little bit of added stress. But that stress should be for the sake of doing better and progressing, not appeasing some kind of overlord beyond you, and then feeling guilty about it. If you want to support my work, consider subscribing to the Mystery Codex on Substack or at solomonpakal.com. There I have early access to all my content. I have deeper dives in the form of written articles. I also have signature series that I cannot release on YouTube or any other platform. Consider booking a tarot reading or Mayan astrological birth chart with me at mayanmysteryschool.com. Link in the description. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.